Thank you. Everyone hear me okay? Cool, awesome. Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for coming out. Really means a lot. This is my first time presenting at a Python conference, so really appreciate you guys coming in to listen me talk. My name is Abrar Sheikh. I work as a backend software engineer at Yelp for the distributed systems team. My team is responsible for building infrastructure that enables real-time transfer of data between microservices and data stores. The infrastructure that we built is on top of Apache Kafka, and it leverages technologies like Apache Spark, Apache Flink, Python primarily, and Scala. I suffer from a genetic disorder called albinism, which is mainly characterized by two things. One is lack of pigmentation in body that results in discoloration of skin and hair. Two, severe loss of vision that limits my ability to do certain daily tasks like driving a car or using a computer or reading a book. As I was growing up, I was extremely fascinated by computers, and fortunately for me, with the right support of my parents, I got to pursue a career in software engineering, and I dedicate this talk to them. Um, one of so in today's talk, we would be focusing on we would be discussing some of the challenges that a software engineer, an aspiring software engineer, faces in a typical career path, and we'll look at some of the challenges that he or she would face in both academic paths and professional career. We will also look into um, some of the pragmatic approaches that they can apply to help them overcome those barriers. Really, my hope today is to convince you all that software engineering need not be a difficult profession, even for someone with severe visual impairment. First, let's try to define what low vision actually means and try to set that context. I'm sure everyone has seen this chart some point or the other in their life. It's called Snellin's eye chart, and it's used by optometrists to measure one's visual acuity. Um, the lower down the chart you are able to read, the better your vision is considered to be. A visual acuity of 20 by 70 or lower, that's above, may be considered as low vision, at which point the person would need alternate means of engaging in daily activities that a person with normal vision would do with their own naked eye. This numerical definition of low vision is not universally accepted because it's it b- b- because what low vision means to one person might mean differently to another person. That's why I feel a more functional definition is apt here. It's what the functional definition of low vision states that uncorrectable vision loss that interferes with daily activities, or in other words, not enough vision to do whatever it is that you need to do. And this can vary from person to person. Like to give you some to give you a concrete example, a vision of 20 by 70 may be considered as low vision for someone whose profession is, say, a surgeon, but it's a perfectly fine vision to have for someone who is trying to drive a car. Like, so there are two different aspects to it. As engineers, we all love to quantify things and then make decisions based off it. So let's look at some stats that I pulled from American Community Survey that was conducted in 2015. And this report was published on National Foundation for Blind. 2.3% of total US population today suffers from some degree of vision loss. That's 7.1 million people. This number should remind us all as someone in tech community that we have a moral responsibility to make sure our software and applications that we build are accessible to as many people as possible. There is a talk that will happen sometime tomorrow about auditing your software for accessibility. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I highly encourage you all to go check it out. Let's look at some education data. Uh, for a population set that contains just people with low vision between the age groups 21 to 64, about 25% of the people drop out before high school, whereas the national average stands at about 5%, and this stat is from 2005. Let's look at some unemployment rate. For, for a population set that contains people with low vision in the age group of 21 to 64, 70% of the people are unemployed, and national average stands at around close to 5%. So those are some staggering numbers, and what they indicate is a clear gap in our society that needs to be addressed in both educational and employment tracks. Let's look at some of the academic challenges that that an aspiring software engineer would face in his college or school. Our education system currently is centered purely around classroom learning, and this has been the primary means of consuming knowledge for a long time now. The fundamental problem with this is for someone with severe loss of vision, it's extremely difficult to grasp content from a blackboard or a projector, uh, given the best possible optical correction and the proximity to the front of the class. Uh, one one way one way this can be tackled by the student is by use of a device called monocular. Monocular is a visual aid device that lets you see far off objects and texts. It's similar to a magnifying glass, but for long distance. There are some ways school can also help. You should reach out to your student registrar or admin at the school. They can help facilitate appropriate accommodations. A few examples that have worked for me in the past are extra time during examinations and assignments, an assistant who can help me take notes during the class, or access to large font textbooks which otherwise are not easily accessible. Please discuss your condition with your faculties and professors. They can help arrange recorded lectures from previous years, or they can give you access to, uh, they can, they can give you permission to record ongoing lectures in the current semester. Um, they can also let you have access to classroom notes and slides even before each lectures. In combination of in combination, all these strategies will help you come prepared in a class so that the factor of ambiguity is eliminated. From a perspective of someone with low vision, another fundamental challenge that they face is access to reading materials. That includes books and research papers, which are often in smaller fonts. A simple strategy using which this can be overcome is with the use of a magnifying glass. I know that sounds simple. Uh, a magnifying glass with an optical zoom of 3x to 5x should sufficiently offset the difficulty in reading. However simple this sounds, this is one of the most often overlooked factor because it takes a lot of practice of getting used to. Cool. So another problem that a person with low vision faces is access to computers, and this is slightly more difficult because of the dynamic nature of content that is presented on the screen. Um, Luckily for us, and it's at the same time it's kind of hard to imagine a career in software engineering without getting easy access to technology, right? Um, Luckily for us, the early pioneers of operating system developers built accessibility into the core of the software. Both Microsoft and Apple do a great job with their suite of accessibility tools that ship with the operating system. A fundamental way in which a person with low vision can gain access to computers is with the help of an on-screen magnifier. And actually, let me show you how that looks in practice to set right context. Let's go to Yelp.com, right? Because that's the best website out there. So immediately at this point, I have not engaged any accessibility tool. From looking at the website from my perspective, which I I don't immediately read any content on the screen. All that is visible to me is, hey, there is some text area on the top here, which lets me search. Maybe there are some links below that, but I don't exactly know what those links mean or what texts what text is presented on those links. If I scroll to the bottom, I see some more images. Maybe those are linked to businesses, but I don't exactly know what each business means. Uh, so to help me figure out all that, I'm going to engage the on-screen magnifier, right? And as soon as I do that, now the lower half of the screen helps me navigate through where things are on the screen, where the upper half of the screen is actually the magnifying area, uh, which helps me which helps me inspect individual content. Right now, I say for example, I want to get some tacos in Columbus tonight, and I not just any tacos, I want the best tacos. Right. So as soon as I do that, this is going to fire up a query. Now this takes me to a new page. If I'm not looking at if I'm not looking through the magnifier, all I know is that this page has a two-pane layout. The left pane has some list of businesses, which with images, but I don't immediately know what those businesses are or what their attributes are. All I know that there is a list of businesses. So now I can start scanning through these businesses, but all the while I'm looking at the top of the screen. My perspective is that section of the screen. Um, this has pretty good reviews. Let me quickly look at top 3. Among the 3, this looks to be better, so I'm probably going to go there. Cool. So maybe that gives you some idea of how a person with visual impairment uses computers. But if that was not clear, let me try to explain that with a different analogy. Imagine you just moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and you have no idea how the city map looks like. The only way you're going to get from point A to point B is with the help of a navigation system. Now, the navigation itself will tell you what the higher level layout of the city looks like. It makes you aware of your surroundings, but it's it's the windshield's perspective that helps you look ahead on the road and make those driving decisions. The way a person with low vision uses computer is very similar to how a new driver drives around the city with the navigation turned on, where the zoom area of the screen is analogous to the windshield of the car, and the lower half of the screen is the navigation. Cool. Let's look at some of the challenges that a person with low vision would face in his professional career, but um, getting hired, like this is the biggest one. Um, and as soon as you graduate, this is the first thing you're probably going to do. When I started interviewing with companies, one of the biggest battles that I had to fight was with my own insecurities. Like I would constantly analyze my limitations and conclude that, hey, there is no way any company is going to hire me. And I think to small or large degree, that's true with all of us. We tend to do that on occasions. The next time you find yourself in this situation, I want you to remember these 3 things. And because any technical recruiter only cares about following questions about a candidate, right? Like simple, we all have seen this job description before, right? Do you have exceptional analytical and problem solving skills? Do you have the right leadership skills to solve business problems? Are you a strong team player? That sounds really simple, but that's the truth. I can attest to the fact that your visual limitation should have little to no impact on fulfilling those job requirements. But I will say this categorically, that if you are a person with physical limitation and you're starting to interview with a company, do not hesitate to bring that up with your hiring manager, because your hiring decision, your physical limitation will have no play in your hiring decision. And I can say that because now that I've spoken to a lot of recruiters myself, and I constantly go back and ask them this question, this is one thing that they say categorically. But if you are a recruiter and you are in the process of interviewing a candidate, which maybe a candidate with low vision for a technical role, I recommend doing these 2 things. Ask the candidate if they need extra time during the interview. Make sure the interviews are conducted on a whiteboard instead of a computer screen. And I'll get to the second point some point later in my slides why this is important. There are many ways in which your peers can help you once you are stepped into that professional role and in your job. There are numerous ways in which your peers can help you. Now, peers can mean different things on different occasions. Peers could be your manager. It can be associates that you work with on your team or in your company. It could be tech community at large, which includes everyone in this audience. As a manager, he can you can facilitate appropriate workspace accommodations, and this can vary from person to person, right? The few things that my manager does for me personally are he makes sure that I have a desk away from bright lit sunlight, because extremely bright environments make for a very unpleasant working experience. He makes sure that I have access to the slide decks before every team meetings, because it's not always the case that when I'm sitting in a meeting room, I have visual access to the projector or the screen in the room. Um, there is so if you look at an engineer with low vision, there is a very particular way in which he uses the computer, as I just showed you, with all the accessibility features turned on. So he's probably very seamless in his work on his own workstation, but maybe not so much on someone else's computer, right? So next time, as an associate, the next time when you're trying to work on a problem with another engineer who has, say, low vision, one thing that you can do to ease that process is by making sure all the discussions are happening on a whiteboard, or or the problem context is shared articulately in tickets and documents. We all know test coverages and documentation in code is extremely good for engineering productivity. This is even more true for someone involved with low vision. Let me try to explain that with an example. Let's pick a function. Yeah, let's pick this function, right? From a perspective of someone with low vision, the amount of code he or she can read at any given point of time is just 3 or 4 lines of code, because that's what is visible on the top. Anything below this is not in the field of perception. But that number for a normal engineer is about 10 lines of code without moving a muscle, right? So if I had to understand what's going on in this function, I have to do a linear sweep back and forth multiple times before I can actually make sense of what's going on here. Uh, Now, the nice thing about this function is that it has nice documentation. One linear sweep of the documentation is enough to tell me what's going on. So that increases the developer productivity from the perspective of someone who has low vision. Cool. Just to recap and in conclusion, all the things that we talked about today. If you are someone aspiring to be a software engineer, these are the high level things that you need to do. And this actually doesn't restrict, this is not restricted to just software engineering, but it probably applies to every profession in general. The first thing you need to do is gather all your tool sets. Right? The tools that we discussed today are, say, use of a monocular in a classroom, use of a magnifying glass to read a book, or use of an on-screen magnifier to get access to computers. But that's not an exhaustive list, and by no means it applies to everybody. Everybody is different. So make sure you you gather the tool sets that fit best for the job that you're trying to do. Once you have that, practice and perfect your skill using those tool sets. Make sure your work is seamless. Once you get into a professional career, you already have you've already defined your patterns, and you have a way around using your own tool sets. And then finally, do not hesitate to ask help. because the intention from a perspective of someone with low vision, the intention should never be to create a sympathetic work environment, but rather it's in your best interest to make sure your peers are aware about your conditions so that they can step in and help you whenever necessary. Looks like we have about 10 minutes, so I'll try to do a live code demo so that you guys can see you guys can see how I code. I think that's good to set some context. The example itself isn't that interesting, but what I want you to focus on is how I navigate my way through the editor and the shell, and all the while make sure you're focused on the top half of the screen so that you're seeing what I'm seeing. So the example that we are going to do today, so I'm an infrastructure engineer, so I'll do an infra demo. Um, the, uh, we, we will try to build a super minimalistic data pipeline, um, which includes a Kafka producer and a Kafka consumer. The producer is going to write Avro serialized messages to a message bus, which is Kafka in this case. And the consumer is going to consume those Avro serialized messages from Kafka. Kafka is just a log-based messaging system. So for my benefit, I've bootstrapped the project with some files that you see in every other project. Uh, the important pieces that I want you to focus on is this writer schema. So this is the format of the data in which I'll be writing with. It has just two fields, ID and name for a business, and there's also a reader schema, which is currently exactly same as the writer schema. So my producer will be publishing the data which is serialized in the writer schema, and consumer will be consuming data in the reader schema format. Well, let's code up the consumer first. I don't know the definition of this function, so I'm going to cheat.
It's just like how I code.
So that defines my topic. This defines my seed nodes to connecting to the Kafka server. And I need two more things. This tells the consumer that it has to read from the end of the topic and not from the beginning of the bus. Once I have my consumer set up, I'm going to set up my schema. I'm going to read that schema defined in the writer schema file. I also need a reader schema. I think I need some imports. Yeah, feel free to call out if I'm missing something. So at this point, I'm going to start consuming the messages from the bus. So that generator will give me individual messages that it reads from the message bus. And I need an output stream. Once I have that, I will use. So fast Avro gives me access to the serialization and deserialization logic. Notice how I adjust the magnifier as I code, as I start coding. So I'm going to load, so the payload will contain the deserialized data. To print that out. Yeah, I guess that should be sufficient.
Where does fast Avro come from?
Good point. Just, just a hint that will tell us that the process is up. So I've already loaded up my virtual environment, so we don't have to wait for that. Python consumer. Hope that works. It's okay. Thank God. Cool. So now we have our consumer ready. Let's work on the producer piece.
Yeah, Brad, did you say
5 minutes. Cool. Thanks. So let's make this quick. Cool. Producer is set up. The producer only needs writer schema. It doesn't need the context of reader schema. So, and now I'm going to generate some fake data. Create a record. So remember my schema had 2 fields. They need to match here. Okay. Input string. I think I need all these imports, so I'm just going to copy them here.
You can run an extra S in schemas.
Good catch. Cool. So, okay. Now I have successfully serialized my data. So record is a Python dictionary. I've converted record into I've serialized record using the fast Avro schema less writer. The only thing left is to publish that data. To this topic. So I do that, I'm going to flush my producer. Cool. Let's see if that works. Awesome. So what you see here is the producer published 100 messages with a certain schema, and the consumer was able to read those schemas, read the messages out of the schemas. Because we have time. We have time.
There's all in there.
Cool. Let's make this a little interesting. Let's add an extra field to the writer schema. Right. Because I want the schema to be compatible, I'm going to give this a default value of 0. And cool. I'm going to publish that same data again. Cool. So what that signifies is I was able to publish a data with a different schema than what the consumer was reading on. So imagine you have 2 connectors. You're streaming data from MySQL to your data warehouse Redshift. MySQL, you can change the schema on MySQL, while the Redshift schema still remains the same. That way the producers and consumers are decoupled from one another. That's all I had. Thank you. I'll be outside if someone has any questions. Happy to take them.